Welcome to another episode on the First Lady series. I remain your host, Queen Chichi. And today I want to talk about something I have titled Encounter. Yes, I want us to understand something about encounter. There are two different kinds of encounter. We have the spiritual encounter and we have the physical encounter. Now, the spiritual encounter is the only encounter that changes your life. The spiritual encounter is the only encounter that transforms your life into the God given life. Spiritual encounter is the only encounter that changes your story, that gives you that testimony you have been looking for. Now, when we look at the story of Jacob in the book of Genesis, chapter 32, we understand that Jacob had an encounter when he wrestled with the angel, and at the end of the day, whatever he was looking for came to him, and that was when Jacob's name was changed from Jacob to Israel. Now that was the transformation. From that Israel, we now had the people of God, whom God called his own people. Now see, Jacob, a normal person, had a spiritual encounter, and that changed his story, changed his destiny, and changed his purpose in life. Now when you have a spiritual encounter, your destiny changes from the satanic destiny to the God-given destiny. That is what is called spiritual encounter. Now we have the physical encounter, which is the encounter we have with human beings. Now human encounter or physical encounter is limited. Do you know why? Because they cannot go beyond or above the human capacity. Human encounters can be limited to what they can offer at that point in time. Oh, I'm looking for a job and I got this connection, and that is why I have this physical encounter with this person and I have this connection and I got this job. Now that is just it. But you also need the spiritual encounter to retain that job. You need the spiritual encounter to retain that job because you don't know what is going to happen next. Because there are still forces that are going to fight you with that physical human encounter that you have actually obtained. Now when you have that human encounter, you don't just back up, you don't just relax, you don't just sleep. You attack it spiritually, and that is when you need a spiritual encounter to retain that job, to retain that position, to be where you are, because humans have done their own. They cannot go beyond human capacity. They have done what they can do, but you need a spiritual encounter to retain that testimony. You need a spiritual encounter to make sure you are at the God-given place you are. You need a spiritual encounter to be where you are, because without that spiritual encounter, you go nowhere, my friend. Without that spiritual encounter, you go nowhere, my sister. Without that spiritual encounter, you go nowhere, my brother, because the spiritual encounter will retain that position. Now, human encounter has made you get to that particular position you're looking for. Human encounter has made. So Jacob has been trying. He has done something. Not that Jacob did not do anything, but he needed that spiritual encounter to change his level. He needed that spiritual encounter to go. Now let's look at the story of Jabez. Jabez was born in sorrow. Jabez was born because his mother gave birth to him in bitterness. And what happened to him? Because yes, he had everything, but he needed more. He needed to change his story. And that is why he cried unto God and said, oh Lord, that would bless my soul. He cried unto God and God changed his story. That was Jabez's spiritual encounter. Now, Esther was just a normal person. She had the physical encounter and the human capacity, which was going to make her get closer to the king. But guess what? She still needed to pray. She still needed to pray to get that crown. She still needed to pray. She was working. See, you can be working on your human encounter and be working on your spiritual encounter. Human encounter or physical encounter, you can be working on that, also work on your spiritual encounter, because that will take you to the next level. See, there is something about the spiritual encounter. When you encounter God, see, when you encounter God, your story changes. When you encounter God, your testimony comes up. When you encounter God, there is a solution to that problem because God has destined it. See, the spiritual encounter is the only encounter that can break protocols. The spiritual encounter is the only encounter that can break every activity of the enemy that have planted. See, we all yearn for level changes. We all yearn to get to that height. But what are you doing? You need a spiritual encounter. That is where you need to go and pray. Don't joke with your prayer life. That is where you need to go and pray, because that spiritual encounter will change your story. See, if there's nothing that you have gained in this life, gain the encounter with God. Gain that spiritual encounter for you to get to that level you want. Take it. Thank you so much for your time. It's very short because I just want to talk about the encounter, because when you have a spiritual encounter, see, grace follows you, testimonies follows you. You will get whatever you're looking for, because the spiritual encounter is the only encounter that changes your story and changes your destiny and gives you the God-given purpose for your life. See you next time. I remain your host, Queen Chichi, and don't forget, like, share, and comment on my YouTube page or any of my pages. I really appreciate your page. I love you, but don't forget, God loves you more.